Kingdom, and all I can say is that it has hill in the name, and therefore every year the town council do this oh-so-ironic sort of thing of hosting a crappy street carnival that we all jokingly call the Nothing Hill Carnival. Get it? Hilarious, right? Almost as funny as Thanksgiving. In fact, I'd actually prefer that. Well, I'm just being salty because of what happened to me there. I used to have a good laugh there, even if it sucked balls, and was a bit of a laugh with my mates, a good excuse to buy some overpriced handmade tats, look at nice parade floats, all three of them usually, and get a bit tipsy. Now this year, in 2014, I'd recently started dating a new guy, now my husband, James. And he was my boyfriend at the time, but I know I'm going to slip up in the story and call him my husband, so you get the point. Now I went to the carnival with James, and there were some decent cheese stalls this year actually. James is a cheese fan, and I've been known to partake in the devil's milk from time to time too, so we spent far too long sampling different cheeses. And I kid you not, we spent over 80 quid on cheese that day and nearly 20 quid on bread. There's this one local farm that just makes the most insanely good cheese. Now anyway, this isn't important. What is important is that we were lurking around the cheese counter when the parade started. The first entry in the parade was a local marching band, and holy freaking sugar babes did they suck. They were all these old fellas wearing what looked like 1940s marching band gear, and I guess it was some tradition that they do in conjunction with the local museum. But some of these old boys, playing the bugle and the French horn and things like that, and they looked like they were about to drop dead. They tried their best, bless them, but imagine a group of pensioners marching along under the blistering sun, playing marching band instruments. It sounded about as good as you'd expect. And so good, in fact, that I whipped out my phone and started filming them, because damn, this would have made for a good content back then when you were still allowed to make fun of people in a nice way. And I wish I still had the video, but my entire phone got smashed that day for reasons you'll soon find out, and the video hadn't uploaded to iCloud on my local town's then crappy 3G back then, so yeah, lost media, I guess. Now, I was so caught up in filming these old duffers giving it their all that I didn't even notice something my boyfriend had done. He was looking at the procession following behind the marching band, a group of tumbling, cartwheeling clowns. And by tumbling, I mean struggling, and by cartwheeling, I mean some of them could do it, sure, but half of them looked more like lads who'd stumbled out of the pub and were accidentally doing acrobatics. Now, one of them was proper good at it. He was kind of a big fella, so I didn't expect him to be as spry on his feet as he was, but he was doing these sort of front flips and all sorts. It was absolutely fascinating. And that's who I thought my boyfriend was pointing to at first when he kept tugging on my elbow and telling me to look. But no, it was another clown that he wanted to check out. This other guy was thin, a lanky lad with a bald cap and green tufts of hair above his ears. Something about his gait seemed familiar, and he came pushing and shoving through the parade of clowns, storming in our direction like someone over here had actually pissed on his VHS tape of killer clowns from outer space or something. And he shoved a trumpet player out of the way, who let out a sort of goodness me and came barreling right for us. And that's when I realized that we were this bozo's intended target. He stormed right up to us in these huge clown shoes with this crappy face paint dripping down his face with sweat, clumping up on his dark facial hair. He accused me of moving on from him pretty quickly. Oh God, no, surely not. But there it was, my ex-boyfriend, Am. Now his definition of moving on from him pretty quickly was certainly an odd one. We'd broken up nearly 2 years ago. James wasn't even the guy that I dated since then. I told him it was a long time ago, and then he got all sad. He said he'd never gotten over me and that I broke his heart. And then he did something even more unexpected. He quoted that freaking Notting Hill scene, that famous one you might remember. Only remember, he was dressed as a clown, and he also didn't get it right. And from the best of my memory, this is what he said. "I'm just a guy, hanging out with a girl, asking if she'll let me love her." I did probably the worst thing I could do. But he dressed like a half-assed clown, and I hadn't even thought about this guy in years. He was a brief college romance from what I recall, and so I kind of just laughed in his face, to which he responded by reaching in his back pocket and producing a jar of a very cloudy liquid and quickly unscrewing it. Now he said something like, if I was going to laugh in his face, then how would I like this in my face instead? And for a second, my mind went somewhere gross. but when he took the lid off the jar, I could sort of smell it. A caustic, burning smell. Now remember that other clown I mentioned? The larger lad who was actually acrobatic and putting on a good performance? He was right by us now. Now James, bless him, hadn't quite worked out what Am was going to do. He moved to tackle him, and I remember saying don't, like I think he's holding acid. And the other clown, whose name that I'd find out later was Len, had already realized something bad was going down, but when he heard this, he came leaping out of the crowd right towards me, and I felt him slam against me just as Am threw the liquid towards me. I suddenly felt a burning sensation on the shoulder of my t-shirt and immediately ripped it off. Only a splash had hit me, and I'll tell you now, thankfully whatever substance Am had cooked up, which we found out he'd stolen from the chemistry lab at the school that he worked as a janitor, wasn't that potent. But it was potent enough that it caused some genuine damage to my bare flesh, and particularly my eyes. It didn't hit my face, though. It hit Len's. Len, who it turned out was wearing thick, homemade grease paint that he swore by in his career as a clown compared to the, in his words, sticky, sicky crap that they sell at circus supply shops. I don't fully understand the science, but I know the makeup he used involved a combination of water-based lubricant and baking soda, and he swore by it for makeup that wouldn't run in the heat. It also meant that the acid, instead of destroying his face, was almost neutralized by the damn grease paint. He did end up with a few small scars, especially around his hairline where the grease paint met the wig. But Len, who is now a lifelong friend, is some kind of genius, I think. He kept his eyes shut, screamed for something to wipe his face with and some water, and he quickly asked me to soak the t-shirt and use that to wipe his face clean, and it really did manage to negate most of the damage Am would have done. Meanwhile, as all of this was going on, James was acting as my hero in another way. Now, I don't want to be one of those wives, but my husband's a bit of a hard nut, especially back then. So, he was beating the absolute living crap out of Am, who, let's not forget, was dressed like a rubbish clown. And at one point, he had Am down on the ground and was genuinely concerned that he was going to end up getting murder charges for curb stomping this guy. I mean, if someone had tried to acid attack him, I'd probably have done the same thing, but, you know. I yelled at him to stop and dragged him away. And thankfully there were so many bystanders and witnesses, including the local bobbies, that James really didn't risk much. Am was comfortably convinced not to press charges in exchange for a bit of leniency in the charges against him being dropped down to something a little less serious. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that. The guy tried to permanently scar me for breaking up with him nearly 2 years ago. But hey, you take what you can in the legal system, I guess. Now, he did go to prison, and he's probably out now, but thankfully I have a restraining order against him that my lawyer ensures stays renewed and active. And so to Am, I hope you've become a better person, because to me, you'll always be a steaming pile of crap and an insult to clowns everywhere. So I'm a big horror buff, as you can probably imagine, since I'm a longtime subscriber of your channel. Love your stories, the scarier the better. And when I was a little kid, I used to persuade my babysitter to let me watch my parents' horror collection on VHS, or have her bring tapes over herself. I'd promise her that I wouldn't have nightmares, and I never did. I handled everything perfectly, except for one freaking movie. One movie that terrified the absolute living crap out of me and gave me nightmares for weeks. If any of you have seen it, you're gonna laugh your asses off. Ghoulies 2. I mean, I guess at least it wasn't Ghoulies Go to College, but still, Ghoulies 2 wasn't even freaking serious horror movie, really. It's a comedy horror, and not exactly the most celebrated of entries in the venerated Ghoulies franchise. Now, I won't explain the whole damn movie, but it involves a group of little critters, the Ghoulies, and one of them is a little bald green fish dude with sharp teeth. The movie takes place mostly at a fairground, and there's a scene where a clown is on one of those dunk tank attractions. You know, the kind where you throw balls at a target and knock the person into the water? In Ghoulies 2, the clown gets dunked and the fish ghoulie bites his arm off and then kills him. Now somehow in my stupid kid mind, this was what the dunk tank at a fairground was supposed to be. Some kind of device where the person getting dunked was at least under threat of being murdered. And I guess I thought that the tank usually had piranhas or sharks or something in it. God knows, really. Now, I was about 6 when this happened. I was horrified and completely mortified to discover that my dad, who was the town sheriff deputy, was going to be up on the duck tank at the local fair. Now, I couldn't tell why I was so horrified. I asked him why he'd risk his life like that, but he didn't seem to understand what I was saying, and I was too scared of getting busted for watching ghoulies too, so I guess I couldn't really explain myself very well. I wasn't the most logical or eloquent kid. Now, the night of the fair comes, and I'm absolutely crapping my pants at the idea of my dad being dropped into the tank of piranhas or sharks or ghoulies. And I kept crying that night until Mom threatened to ban me from the fair, and I knew that I had to attend just in case there was something I could do to save my father. Now, watching with horror as they filled the tank and he climbed up onto the seat. The tank was about 8 feet high, so neither I nor anyone else could really see the monsters that I was certain lurked within. Now, I got this genius idea that every time someone would take a throw, I'd cough or sneeze or make some kind of noise to disrupt their aim. Now, this actually seemed to work, or maybe some people in my town were just terrible shots, or they were just too afraid to dunk the sheriff's deputy. And the whole thing was just ridiculous. Dad was dressed up like a sheriff clown. He had this Stetson hat on and this huge ruff around his neck that meant that he couldn't really do anything but look forward. And the whole point of being the dunk tank clown is you're supposed to goad the missile throwers into hitting you. Every time Dad chided them on, I remember saying no and doing my best to disrupt their aim. In the end, a local guy realized what I was doing and joked with my dad that his kid was trying to save him from his fate. Now, somehow I got it into my head that this meant that everyone, including my father, knew that it'd be the death of him if he fell into that water. Why would he even agree to it? I was baffled. I had no idea what to do, so I crept around the back of the tank looking for a solution. Now, sneaking through the bushes, I saw 3 teenagers. I knew that they were trouble. They had a reputation as bullies, and even my older sister, who was their age, didn't always keep the best of company, had also told me that these guys were bad news. I watched them from the bushes for a bit, and I realized that they were piercing the tank with what looked like knives and allowing it to drain into the large drainage ditch that ran along the edge of the trees lining the carnival. One of them said something like, "This'll put a stop to that monster." And in my head, I was thinking, finally, someone else who knows. And these guys know about the ghoulie, and they're going to help my dad out. And then one of the teens turned and saw me. He started to look angry, but immediately I assured him that I wouldn't tell and that they were doing a good thing. I think I even thanked them, and this made them laugh a lot and continue hacking away at the back of the tank, letting the water flow out even faster. Now remember, the tank was around 8 feet high, so nobody playing the carnival game could see the water level lowering, and I didn't realize this at the time, but the rough Dad was wearing as a part of his clown costume prevented him from looking properly downward, and thus also noticing the dropping water level. Now, the teens told me to keep quiet, and I said, "Don't worry, you've saved my father." And they looked at each other very confused like. I didn't understand at the time, but I ran back around the front to witness what? I'm not really sure. A few more players later, and someone finally hit the target, and the seat collapsed under my father, and I guess I expected him to land in the bottom of the pool like some kind of ninja, safe in the knowledge that the ghoulie or shark or whatever had been swept out into the ditch. And instead, Dad disappears from sight into the pool, and the next thing I hear is the loudest, most horrific cracking sound, and then a scream that should have woken the dead. People were running up the poolside ladder, trying to climb in and see what had happened. I was jumping, trying to get enough traction in my tiny frame to apparently clear an 8-foot wall, and all I could think was that the ghoulie had gotten him after all, and that we'd been unsuccessful in our attempts at saving him. Of course, what had really happened is that Dad had fallen around 10 feet into a pool that was no longer having water in it. Being completely unaware it no longer had water at the bottom, he wasn't even able to brace himself for the fall. He just landed straight onto his legs, shattering one ankle and breaking the fibula of his other leg. Now, eventually, after much chaos and screaming and crying and frantic action and paramedics, I realized that I had screwed up big time. Now, my dad wasn't a strict dad, the opposite in fact, and that's maybe why I felt even worse that I just stood by and let these teenage delinquents basically try to murder my dad. In my defense, and theirs, I really don't think they intended to cause him as much harm as they did. I think they were just as dumb as I was for believing in ghoulies and thought that he'd fall into the pool and just hurt his butt or something. Now, he spent some time in the hospital, during which I know that there was an investigation into who drained the water and sliced the tank. Now, I was petrified and kept quiet. It's not like I'd done it myself after all, but I did keep dropping hints to my sister and my mom saying, "Hey, remember those kids you told me about, sis? Do you think they could have been involved?" Eventually, people kept telling me to just shush because I was probably only 5 or 6 at the time. Now, I finally admitted the truth to my dad on my wedding night, slightly drunk at the reception, and the fall had caused him to take early retirement from the police force, and he'd gone into local politics instead. Now, at the time of my wedding, he was sitting pretty as the mayor, and he'd done well for himself, and I confessed everything toward the end of the night. Now, I looked from my dad to my sister to my new wife. Sadly, Mom had passed away some years before and never got to celebrate the big day with us, sadly. And Dad began to absolutely roar with laughter, and so did my sister. As it turns out, they'd caught the kids who'd done the crime after a couple of weeks. They'd admitted to everything and been surprisingly remorseful, and also mentioned how a little kid had been there, talking about goblins or ghouls or something. My mom, dad, and sister had put 2 and 2 together and allowed me to live with my secret because in their eyes, all I was really guilty of was not wanting my dad to be grabbed by the ghoulies. So this happened back in the 80s, before health and safety was really quite as severe as it is now. We were just a group of thrill-seeking kids heading to the county fair and excited to ride the most dangerous, unstable, poorly built rides we could find. The more rickety and unsafe it felt, the more we loved it. Weren't a lot of us like that as kids? That was the thrill of the fair, really, wasn't it? The idea that these gruff, greasy men operating the rides genuinely didn't give enough of a crap about you to care whether you lived or died, and that there was every chance that the tilt-a-whirl or bumper cars could go flying up the tracks in some fiery wreck, killing you instantly. I guess that was just part of the fun. Or maybe we were just idiots. We were at a theme park one day, and it had a reputation for being a bit unsafe, and it was in our local area, so of course we hung out there a lot. It was a coastal fun fair and brought in so much money to the town that I'm convinced that brown envelopes changed hands to get safety checks signed off because, let me tell you, there were so many minor injuries and breakdowns in that place. Nothing like the incident that happened to our buddy that day, though. We were strolling down the boardwalk, just taking a break between rides. It was 5 of us, 4 guys and 1 girl, and we were all sort of alternative types. The girl, Layla, had huge permed hair sprayed green. I had a spiky mohawk. You get the picture. People kept away from us even though we were just really posers, honestly, and wouldn't have hurt a fly. Our one buddy, though, the real thrill seeker, had decided that the real punk move was dressed like a 50s dad with a beige tank top, braces, chinos, and thick-rimmed glasses. It was honestly hilarious. These 4 stereotypical alternatives and this one guy who looked like if he were any more square, he'd be a Tetris piece. The square one, obviously, but it was hilariously ironic. He was the wildest one of us, and while I wouldn't say that he was the leader, he definitely was the linchpin that kept us all together. His idol was Andy Kaufman, and if that gives you any idea as to what kind of guy he was, in fact, hey, let's just call him Tony, as in Tony Clifton, the beloved Andy Kaufman character. Our buddy was always doing that impression, and he'd get a kick out of this. And so we were just wandering around and chilling when Tony stopped us all, acting all covert-like, and ushered us to duck into this little alleyway. I went to ask him what was up, but he put his finger to his lips theatrically and pointed towards this little shed, where he could hear 2 carnival workers talking. They were talking about one of the roller coasters, a fairly mid one, not even one that we'd usually bother with. One of them was telling the other one that the safety bars in the second was being a bit screwy, and so to make sure that they told the other guy running the coaster to really slam it into place, or better yet, not use that specific carriage at all. Now, Tony looked at the rest of us and just whispered, "We're doing this," and then took off into a sprint, running toward the coaster. We jogged behind him, completely aware of what he had planned without him even having to explain it to us. He was going to ride the coaster without the safety bar down, and figured that if he could get there before the employee could warn the current guy on shift, he'd be able to make sure that the bar didn't lock. It had been one of his weird life dreams to ride a roller coaster bareback, as he put it. We got to the coaster, which didn't even have a line because it wasn't that popular, and the rest of us were like, no way, man, we're not stupid. You do it if you want to, and so we did. We watched from the ground as Tony let the employee push the safety bar down, and then he gave us a wink and a thumbs up and sort of cheekily showed us that the bar wasn't locked in place properly, and the ride took off. We could see that Tony was holding the bar steady, and goddamn him, he was managing it, and he was using one hand to make sure that the bar didn't fly open and the other to hold himself in place against the coaster. It was honestly really impressive. We really thought that he was going to do it. The absolute maniac was going to fulfill his dream of riding that coaster bareback. And then came the incline and the big drop. At the top, Tony leaned down towards us, a speck in the distance, and gave us another thumbs up. I guess he misjudged exactly when the roller coaster was going to shoot downward because he wasn't actually holding on when it did so. And so the roller coaster shot forward to begin its descent, building speed over the arch at the top, and Tony went flying out of that cart and through the air. And I swear it felt like slow motion. Our friend's body catapulting out of the roller coaster and through the air, and I swear I saw a smile on that doofus's face, but that could have just been wishful thinking. Screams were erupting around me as people saw the body flying off that roller coaster, but it all sounded underwater to me, and my eyes just followed my friend as he ragdolled through the air. For a moment, I wondered if maybe he'd land in the sea and be fine, but I could see that he was heading toward the forested area just behind the park. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, and by now, Tony's body had disappeared from sight beyond that tree line. Now I was the first to reach the scene, and what met my eyes wasn't so much a human body anymore. It was pieces of a body, like a person had exploded from within. I don't know if this was because he'd hit some trees on the way down or what, but I can only imagine from the amount of damage that it was very quick and he didn't really feel it. I felt it though, deep in my heart and soul, and I've been feeling it ever since. I see that scene in my dreams at least once a month, and yet I somehow know that our goofy, ridiculous friend Tony would absolutely get a kick out of dying by being catapulted off of a roller coaster. Just maybe not 21 years of age. I think he would have liked to live a bit longer than that, honestly. Unsurprisingly, this death was a bit of a step too far for that theme park, and it was forced to close down. It eventually reopened a few years later under new ownership. Tony's family tried suing the park, but it turns out that the workers who had been talking about the damaged ride had overheard Tony's declarations about riding it. And eventually, under oath, a couple of the group had to admit that Tony knew the ride was faulty, but that he'd intentionally ridden it unsafely. Now, I really don't think that Tony would have wanted that park to get in trouble for his own actions. His family did still get a payout, and the owners dealt with some hefty fines, but I think the alternative would have left them liable for manslaughter, and I know Tony wouldn't have wanted that. He died doing what he loved, riding a roller coaster in the most dangerous way possible, and while I miss him every day, I can't help but hope that he's up there somewhere, laughing his ass off with Andy Kaufman at his own stupidity. I grew up outside of Phoenix, Arizona. We lived rough, played rough, and we were poorer than dirt and had the survival instincts to prove it. Shortly after the events of this story, I joined the Marines, and it was the making of me. I'm a different man now, with lovely kids and even lovelier grandkids. My kids will agree it's fine. And back then, though, we were rough little bastards who thought nothing and no one could knock us off our pedestals. But I suppose we hadn't reckoned on any carnies. Now, I always say, if you ever want to meet men who live harder than you, play rougher than you, and show loyalty to a found family more than you ever will, then you have three options. Join the military, ride with a biker gang, or become a carny. Traveling carnival folk are like nothing else. They will literally kill for each other, and while their code of morals might differ from yours or mine, I respect and understand that. I most certainly did not when the Stanfolk family carnival pitched up in the Poddington's field just outside of our crap-hole little town. We saw the carnival as an excuse to go cause a bit of trouble, maybe pick a pocket or steal a purse or two, show what double-hard bastards we were on some of the rides to impress the chicks. And most importantly, we were absolutely determined to disprove the myth that carnival games were impossible to win. They were rigged, sure, but we were better. We'd clear them out, or so help them God, we'd make sure that they never conned another small town again. Now, this was all before we even went to the carnival, mind you, so we definitely didn't just roll up there that night in my buddy's pickup with the best of attitudes. It was me, two of my male buddies, and then my girlfriend and her friend, who my buddy Pete, the one who owned the truck, was trying to hook up with. Now, don't think that she was too interested, but that didn't stop him from trying. We tried a couple of rides, but mostly we were determined to look good to the girls and win some carny game prizes, so we got hopped up on churros and soda and headed to the games area. Now, the way it worked there was that there was a prize booth where you could exchange tickets for prizes. Each carnival game let you win tickets, and there were big signs saying win 20 tickets here and get 50 tickets there, so it looked like things were doable. Me and my girlfriend wandered over to the prizes tent first, and she set her eyes on this big, fat, plush octopus. She was absolutely in love with the damn thing. This big, green, chubby dude. Big as a St. Bernard. I can remember it perfectly. And it was only 100 tickets. Holy crap, I thought. That was like 2 or 3 major wins on the carnival games. Now first, I headed to the shooting range, where you had to shoot some moving metal ducks with these BB guns, and each downed duck was worth 1 ticket, and if you got 10, then you got a 10-ticket bonus. Firstly, I'm a good shot. I grew up dirt poor and with nothing to do, so shooting cans with an air rifle was an actual genuine pastime of mine. I spent $3 to get 30 shots, which was a decent amount of money back in the 70s, and I managed to down 10 total ducks. I was pretty furious because I'd missed the first 4 or 5 shots due to the gun being incorrectly calibrated, a well-known carnival game trick. Now I knew this, and it still took me a while to adjust, and eventually, over the next 25 shots, I downed 10 ducks. The game attendant handed me 10 tickets with a wide-eyed look, like I'd somehow broken their all-time record. And then I say, "Hey buddy, I got 10 ducks though, aren't that 20 tickets?" And that's when he pointed out that tiny small print which stated that it had to be 10 ducks in a row and also within an individual clip. So you have to spend $1 and hit every target using the bullets from that dollar. Clearly some absolute BS designed to prevent you from basically ever getting the bonus tickets. Now next was the ring toss, and this was just straight up outright impossible. The rings were too small to fit over the boxes, another famous carny trick, and of course when you accuse them of that, they drop the ring over the box and show that no, it does fit. Yeah, it fits when you're dropping it from above, you person, but it's pretty much impossible to land a single target. The guy even gave me a free ticket for, in his words, sucking worse than anyone else he's ever seen play the game. I knew that he was trying to bait me into spending more or getting violent, but I wasn't having it. Instead, I gathered the boys together and sent them off to try winning these tickets. I could see my girl looking at me like, why am I with this loser? Or at least I felt that way at the time, and I was damn well gonna get those 100 tickets I needed. I had 11, it would be doable. And here's how it went down. My buddy, who was a star baseball pitcher, managed to get a measly 4 tickets from tossing baseballs at cans. The hook-a-duck was even worse, and we got 1 ticket from that. Throwing darts at playing cards, we did well at that, only to be told afterward that the rules stated that you have to hit them in numerical order for them to count. Sure, it was written there, but put it this way. My vision was strong enough that I passed the military entrance exam flawlessly, and there was no way that I could have read that sign. We tried the basketball game for a while, but it was obvious that the hoops were too small for the balls. Why we decided that we could beat the carnies at their own game, I have no idea. And at this point, we had 20 tickets, a fifth of what I needed for that octopus. Now, it was enough for a prize. We could have gotten a little toy Spider-Man or some doll or used the tickets for free rides. But no, I was determined to get my girl that freaking octopus, and I was about to run out of money. I made one last attempt. I persuaded my friend to take my girl elsewhere, and then went crawling to the prize tent and begged them to let me just buy the octopus from them. I had $20 left in my name for my paycheck, and that was meant to last for almost a month, and I offered them the entire $20. He told me that he'd been my age once, and he knew the value of impressing a chick, but his dad, who ran the carnival, would kick his ass if he sold it to me for $100, let alone $20. He was trying to be nice, I know he was, but I was an arrogant little crap, so what I did was turn, point at the Ferris wheel and yell, "Holy crap, that ride's on fire!" And the prize tent guy instinctively turned, just for a second, and I shoved him over, leaped the counter, grabbed the octopus, and then off I was running. I screamed at my friends to follow me, that we had to get back to the truck. They saw me hooning it down the fairway, waving this giant octopus plushie over my head, and they knew crap was about to go down. And suddenly, I stopped in my tracks. This huge guy holding a chain stood in front of me, and I could see this corporate-looking name tag stuck to his leather jacket that read Stan Stanfolk, and I guessed he was the owner. He accused me of trying to take off with his octopus, and I said I wouldn't have this if this carnival games weren't rigged and if they had any honor. And this is how I know carnies do have honor. They just see those of us who play their game as entering into a tacit agreement to be screwed, I guess. I've since talked to other carnies about this, including a couple I met in the service, and I feel like I understand where these guys were coming from a lot more now. I didn't at the time, though. Stan Stanfolk was so incensed at me calling a spade that he told me he and his family were going to chain us up behind their bikes and drag us through our podunk little town until we were begging for our lives. And then chaos broke out behind me. My buddies had taken it upon themselves to start smashing up the rig booths until whatever they could get their hands on, garbage cans, benches, baseball bats from one of the games, all sorts of stuff. Stanfolk and the carnies had no idea who to go after first. As he was momentarily distracted, I shoulder charged him and snatched the chain from him, and then I ran to the offending shooting gallery and slammed the chain down into the counter. All in all, I don't think we did that much damage, but we did enough so that in our minds, we'd caused the carnies who'd been ripping off honest folk a decent hit to their income. And like I say, I see things differently now, and I think it was our own damn fault for willingly playing games that we knew we couldn't win and deciding that we deserved to win anyway. Maybe others will disagree and think that the carnies got what they deserve. All I'm going to add to this is, after I joined the military and had a wage, Stan Stanfolk's traveling carnival received a small, mysterious donation every month from an unknown source. Now back to the story, though. Me and the buds floored it. I grabbed my girl and practically carried her to the truck, leaping into the back with her and her friend. Pete got into the driver's seat and our other buddy in the passengers, and we kicked dust and flew out of there. We were not home free, though. At least 3 or 4 carnies on motorcycles began chasing us and shouting things we couldn't hear, but they were certainly threats, I would think. And the chase felt like it went on for hours, but it couldn't have been that long. And this is where I made my fatal mistake, though. Being a cocky a-hole, I semi-stood up in the back of the bed of the truck and waved the plush octopus at them as if to taunt them, and I freaking lost my hold of the thing, and it flew out of my hands and off into the desert. All that effort, and I'd lost the goddamn octopus anyways. Eventually, the carnies clearly gave up, knowing they'd come off worse than us if the law got involved, and unsurprisingly, they did report our act of vandalism, and the next day the traveling fair had mysteriously left town. Me and my buddies tried to backtrack over the route that we'd traveled during the chase, but there was no sign of that freaking octopus. The girl that I'd been trying to impress broke up with me that next day. Needless to say, she was not impressed by someone who flew off the handle and smashed up a carnival just to steal her a toy. And last I heard, she'd married someone in software, I guess. Now, like I said, I'm a very different guy now. I'm ashamed of that night, and I'm sure there's a carny out there, probably the owner's son that I shoved and stole the octopus from, who tells this same event as his own scary story of the night a group of Arizona rednecks smashed up their carnival. And I can't say I'd blame him. All I know is the military set me right, and I avoided any real legal trouble in my idiot youth, and for both of those things, I'm deeply grateful. And for any carnival folk out there or any fellow Marines, Semper Fi, fam. So this happened to my grandma, but she's given me permission to share it with you because I think it's a creepy story people should know. She narrated it to me, so I'm writing her words down, but I wanted to preface this so it makes sense why an 83-year-old woman is sending you a story. I mean, maybe you have a lot of 83-year-old female listeners, but I don't see them in the comments that often, so I assume not. Now anyways, I was a fine young filly in the 1960s. At least that's what the men folk said. So beautiful that I could win prizes, they said. And so I says to them, well, why can't I? Don't we have a state beauty pageant? My folks were against it at first, but as soon as I turned 18, they let me enter. And surprise upon surprise, these men hadn't just been flattering me to get under my petticoats, for which I might add, they would have had to have had my hand in marriage first. I really did have the looks that could win prizes, apparently. I made it to the state finals, and it was an absolute honor, and it was part of the state's grand fair, and this was back in 1967. There were 3 judges: the state governor, the mayor of town in which the finals were being held, and a local businessman who did something with oil. All of these men were perfect gentlemen. I have nothing but nice things to say about how all 3 of these men treated us girls. They made us feel like beauty was something to be proud of, not something tawdry, and honestly, the whole thing was a lot more wholesome and respectful than you hear about in the average beauty pageant. I don't think that I could have seen it through to the state finals if I'd been nothing but a sex object. Now, this event is what killed it all for me, though, and it was thanks to the most unlikely of sources. There were 5 of us girls, and we were all local winners, so we were all used to the game and all very nice to one another. We were prepping for our first round, which was a catwalk round wearing dresses from a local dressmaker. We were in our drawers when the door burst open and the man stood there. He was a bit on the muscular side, with long hair and, I remember, a very attractive jawline. He said he was the sheriff's deputy. Us girls, we were all 18, got a bit shy, of course, and started covering up, and the deputy laughed and told us not to worry. It wasn't anything he hadn't seen before. He had a wife and 2 daughters around our age, and that should have rung alarm bells by itself. Anyway, he said a prowler had been seen in the area, trying to peer in through the dressing room window, which was a tiny little thing 8 feet high, and we'd certainly seen nobody peering in there. And so we uncomfortably put our dresses on while the deputy unashamedly and openly watched us. And over the next 3 months, he was there every time, watching us, undressing us with his eyes while we were forced to actually undress in front of him. And then finally, it's the swimsuit round, and of course, to change for this, we have to get fully naked. Surely the deputy wouldn't be there for that. But he was. One of the more outspoken girls told him that she wasn't comfortable with his presence, and he got a little angry. He whipped out his badge and asked her if she really wanted to risk her place in the competition, or even face obstruction of justice by posing as a problem. Now, of course, none of this really rang true, but we were in a rush for the final round of the competition. And after a quick whisper, what we did was this. One of us changed while the other 4 blocked her from view, and we repeated that 4 times. The deputy was clearly furious about this, but what could he actually do? He had no legal precedent to command us to show him our naked bodies. And so we performed the final stage of the competition. The girl who'd spoken out against the deputy actually won, and I came 3rd, all of which I was thrilled about. And when we went back to change a final time, the deputy was thankfully gone, and we changed back into our regular clothes to mingle with the judges and audience. Now, a couple of us girls met the sheriff and mentioned the deputy being present the whole time, and he got very quiet. We pushed him on what was wrong, and he asked us if we were absolutely sure. Only, it was the deputy's first day, and he hadn't checked in for work. He was due to work security at the pageant, but he had certainly not been authorized to be present in our dressing room, and there had been no reports of a prowler. He asked us to describe the deputy, and we did, and the sheriff went pale and said that didn't sound anything like the new deputy, who was his nephew, a pretty large red-headed guy. Later, they found the deputy. He stumbled in from the wilderness, his ankles and wrists tied together, wearing only a vest and his undergarments. He'd been knocked unconscious, stripped, and had his uniform and firearm stolen. And the firearm was later found discarded in a garbage bin near the hall where the pageant was held. Now, one final twist to the story, and this is the part that I can't be sure about. By 1978, I had a family and a husband, and at this point, a young son. My husband and I were watching an episode of a favorite show of ours when I suddenly pointed at the screen and yelled, "That's him!" My husband asked who, and I said that I was sure as shells were shells that one of the contestants on this game show was the fake deputy from the beauty pageant terror. My husband laughed about this, and so did I. Realistically, what chance was there that a guy who knocked out a sheriff's deputy and then faked being him just to creep on women in the 60s was a contestant on the dating game on the 13th of September 1978? And like I said, I can't be sure. But all I'll say is that when I identified him, all I believed I was looking at was a contestant on the dating game, a contestant they introduced as Rodney Alcala. Now, the more I think about it as time goes on, I do think the creep who perved on me just looked like him, but there's still a chance, a terrifying chance, that the fake deputy we met was the dating game killer. Ave Imperator, Joel. That means Hail the Emperor in Warhammer 40k speech, and yeah, I know it makes me a massive effing nerd. In my defense, A, my boyfriend told me to write to you, and B, it's relevant to the story. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm sure that you said in one of your streams that you're a huge nerd, so I think you'll relate to this. If that actually was one of the other narrators I listened to, then I deeply apologize, and for what it's worth, I think nerds are cool. Now I'm going to call my boyfriend Hank, which is a bit of an in-joke, and when the story happened, we'd only just started dating. We were in college and I didn't know him all that well, and all I really knew was that he was on the football team and I kept encountering him when we'd play various pickup basketball games on the college courts in our downtime. We were both decently good at casual basketball, and our first date was actually shooting hoops one-on-one against each other. And then many dates later, let's just say that strip basketball in the middle of the night is a pretty fun partner experience. Now, this came a bit later though. An earlier basketball experience that we shared was when we went to the state fair with some friends. Hank and I had been dating for around 6 weeks by this point, and one of our buds was seeing one of his girlfriends, so there was a lot of social crossover out of the blue. And it felt like we'd finally really found a solid, friendly bunch of people, all of whom were into sports and physical activities and shared interests. I had no idea that Hank had another side to him, a side that I knew nothing about, a side drenched in blood and dust and rivalries that could spill over into our perfect life. The state fair was always awesome. We always went in the evening and when there were fewer kids running around. The glowing neon lights of the rides and attractions just felt so magical, even as a college kid. The state I went to college in wasn't where I'd grown up. I'd been raised in a much more urban location, so this kind of fair was both a novelty and an extremely exciting treat. And this was the first year that I got to experience it with Hank and my new friends, so I thought everything was going to be perfect. It was, at first. We went on a really scary roller coaster, which I loved because I got to squeeze up to Hank. And then we went to the Ferris wheel, which bothered me a little because I thought that it would be an excuse for a little makeout time, but Hank seemed distracted by something or someone in one of the other carts on the Ferris wheel. Now I asked him what was up and what he was looking at, and he said it didn't matter, just that he could have sworn that he recognized a guy, but there was no way that it could have been him. I didn't press him on it because he seemed so serious, and I was still at that stage where you were kind of courting, I guess, so I wanted to impress him and not just piss him off. And so we met back up with our friends, and next we headed into the Hall of Mirrors. Now we all found this hilarious, looking at ourselves all distorted and weird and ugly looking, and again though, Hank was distracted. I asked him again what was wrong, and this time he looked at me very serious and said that he thought we were being followed. I asked who would be following us, and he just shook his head and said, yeah, it can't be. Now at this point I tried to press him on it, but he just laughed and said that he was being a dumbass as usual. I couldn't help noticing, though, that he kept looking over his shoulder in the Hall of Mirrors and turning quickly as if to catch someone following us. Now, the place was pretty busy, so it was hard to tell if there was even anyone with reflections all over the place, and in the end, Hank sort of laughed it off, and I did my best to distract him by pointing out some cool stuff that we could do next. And the next thing was a haunted house attraction that you walk through. I love horror, and I was excited for this one, but I pretended to be terrified by every jump scare and silly face-painted ghouls, so I had an excuse to grab hold of Hank and play up my Scream Queen aspirations. The haunted house was busy too, and there were 6 of us trying to stick together in the cramped corridors. Hank was absolutely insistent that someone was following us again, though, and when a creepy masked actor burst out of a closet, he almost punched him in the face on instinct. I was starting to get a little more nervous, honestly. Who could be stalking Hank that could have him so spooked? After the haunted house, we began walking down Carnival Alley, stopping to play some of the games. Hank won me a little plush fox, which I still have to this day, and we're all having fun, going off and playing the different games, many of which were surprisingly easy to win. And then Hank saw him. A guy with spiky, iced blonde bleach hair, wearing a Korn t-shirt, these sort of punk jeans, and weighing probably at least 250 pounds. "It's him," Hank said. I knew it. Now his face had gone almost white. What? Who the hell was this nerdy-looking guy, and why was my jacked boyfriend acting like the devil himself was on his tail? Hank said that he had to tell me something important. He grabbed me and gently pulled me into the alley between 2 of the carnival game tents, and he held my shoulders and looked me in the eyes. His expression was grave, to say the least, and I swear to God it looked like he was about to confess a series of murders. And instead, he said something I could have never predicted. I'm a professional Warhammer 40K player, he said, like at a national tournament level. He stared at me like he expected me to spit in his face or slap him or something. And then I was like, oh, my younger brother would love to talk to you about that. He plays the other one, the fantasy one. I help him paint them sometimes. So wait, what's the panic here exactly? Hank looked equal parts relieved and terrified. Later, he'd admitted to me that he was worried that I'd think that he was a loser and a dweeb if I knew how into Warhammer 40K he was. And okay, yeah, he is really into it. Even when he told me that night, I didn't quite understand the extent of his involvement. All those weekends when he'd said that he was off on some hunting trips or had tournaments or training, most of it was Warhammer tournaments. And so he wasn't lying, but the guy was an almost pro-level college football player. I didn't know that he even had the time to play tabletop strategy games. But I found it kind of hot, honestly, and it later made it easier for me to admit to him that I collect American Girl dolls from time to time. We all have weird hobbies, right? But none of this is scary. My boyfriend is a national Warhammer 40K tournament champion isn't the horror twist that I brought to you today. The horror twist was that when he told me that the guy that he'd kept seeing was the guy that he'd beaten in the finals he won over the summer. Finals that took place halfway across the country. An opponent who lived even further away than that. A guy who'd been sending him messages online ever since, acting like a salty little man baby saying that he cheated and his army was OP and he only won because he was attractive. Is that even a thing in Warhammer? And that one day he'd find him in real life and show him what real combat was. Now, I maybe didn't take this quite as seriously as I should have because I'd seen the guy and I knew my boyfriend. And if it came to it, I was pretty sure that my boyfriend could one-punch this fool into oblivion. And so I proposed an idea. Let's make him even more mad, I thought. Hank was hesitant about this because he's a soft baby sweetheart, and I asked him if he was 100% sure that this guy was the Warhammer opponent, and he said yes. Now I led him by the hand out into the carnival alley and saw the guy. He was glowering at our friends standing by the shooting range, and I walked over with Hank and said, loud enough to be heard, I can't believe you were worried that I'd think that you were a loser for playing Warhammer. Like this chump, for example, looks like he plays. I bet you could take him down in round 1. And then I flashed the Warhammer loser this big grin, and he knew that I knew. It was obvious. His face flushed red, and he pointed at Hank and started screaming about how he'd promised this day would come and reckoning was upon him. I then sarcastically said, blood for the god, which I thought was a Warhammer catchphrase, and Hank just gently whispered, it's blood for the blood god, babe. And I just blushed in embarrassment. And that's when that Warhammer loser, angry, spitting with rage, said that if we liked blood so much, then maybe we should experience some blood of our own. He whirls around, grabbed one of the guns from the shooting gallery, aimed it at Hank, and pulled the trigger. Now, the gun made its usual laser bleep-bloop noise, and I saw the mistake dawn on this Warhammer loser's face as he made it. These were not BB guns or air rifles. They were laser target guns, completely light-based, and he just tried to shoot my boyfriend Hank in full view of an entire group of people, including at least 3 cops with what he believed to be a deadly weapon, but was actually a toy gun. That's still a crime, buddy. Now, we were standing by one of those stalls where you grab a baseball and throw it to knock cans down. Now, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed one of the balls and threw it as hard as I could at that Warhammer loser, and it smashed him square in the face. Now, within seconds, this Warhammer guy was tackled by a local sheriff's deputy who happened to be the brother of one of Hank's best buddies. And so then, to cut a long story short, this is how things turned out. Warhammer loser, real name Elias, had a history of unhinged posting on certain internet forums, obsessing over how his opponent, Hank, had cheated and was going to get even with him. He'd eventually been banned from all but the most fringe communities for toxic behavior. And so basically he traveled across the country after finding out where Hank went to college and took a gamble that he'd find him at the local state fair since it was a popular college kid hangout. From what we could gather, he'd been there on the lookout the entire day, This meant that when he grabbed that toy laser gun, there was clear intent to harm, and had the weapon he'd chosen been an actual weapon, it could easily be legally determined that he would have used it. And this meant that he'd be facing a pretty serious charge simply for pointing a toy laser gun at someone and trying to shoot them. In the end, we did him a solid, especially because I didn't really want his dumbass trying to counter-sue me for breaking his nose. We agreed with the prosecutor that we drop our own charges against him as long as he was forced to undergo mandatory anger management. Hank also used his connections in the Warhammer scene to ensure that this Elias was banned for life from a number of high-profile national tournaments. It was all very silly and almost comical, but if you think about it, the fact that he traveled across the country and was willing to fire at least a BB gun or an air rifle at my boyfriend in revenge for sucking at Warhammer is actually pretty freaking terrifying. And it's a reminder that there are some absolutely unhinged people out there. On the plus side, though, Hank and I bonded even further over his nerdy hobby, and he helped my brother evolve from the fantasy Warhammer to the 40K universe, and now they both help run a local tabletop gaming group. Sometimes I even hang out and I mostly just play Pokemon. Anything else is a bit too violent